Chancellor Vrax of the Zephyrians looked around the council chamber and tried not to show his fear. 1 year had passed since the humans left and everything was falling apart. The great hall that once held thousands of delegates now had less than half that number. Many species had stopped sending representatives entirely. The emergency session had been called to discuss the Cronin crisis, but Vrax knew it was too late for discussions. The Cronin hegemony had taken over a quarter of council space in just 12 months. Their black ships appeared without warning, destroyed everything that resisted, and vanished before help could arrive. Admiral Keth of the Nexari stood at the central podium. His blue skin looked pale and his normally perfect uniform was wrinkled. The Nexari prided themselves on logic and efficiency, but logic was not working against the Cronins. "The enemy uses tactics we cannot predict," Admiral Keth reported. "They attack weak points we did not know existed. They retreat when we expect them to advance, and advance when we expect them to retreat. Our battle computers cannot calculate their next moves." General Mora of the Valdorians was next to speak. Her gray fur had turned white from stress and her ancient eyes looked defeated. "We have lost 17 systems in the past month," she said. "Our fleets are stretched too thin. We cannot protect all our borders." The reports continued, and each one was worse than the last. The Solani had been forced to abandon their outer colonies. The Keth were hiding behind defensive shields that would not hold for long. The Karathi had already surrendered 3 of their industrial worlds rather than see them destroyed. What made it worse was that everyone remembered how different things had been when the humans were here. Human commanders had a gift for seeing patterns that alien minds missed. They could look at a battle and somehow know what the enemy would do next. Human soldiers were brave and clever, willing to take risks that saved lives and won victories. But now those humans were gone, and the council fleet stumbled from one defeat to another. The careful strategies that had worked for centuries were useless against an enemy that refused to follow the rules. The economic situation was even worse than the military crisis. Trade had been the foundation of council civilization for thousands of years. Raw materials from mining worlds were sent to industrial planets, where they became finished goods that were shipped to consumer markets across the galaxy. The system had worked because human merchants and logistics experts managed the complex web of relationships between suppliers and buyers. They knew which ships to use for different types of cargo. They understood how to route shipments around dangerous areas. They could solve problems quickly when unexpected delays disrupted the schedule. Without human expertise, the trade network was collapsing. The Valdorians, who had always looked down on human economic theories, watched their currency lose value every day. Planets that had imported food for generations found their supply ships missing or delayed. Industrial worlds ran out of raw materials and were forced to shut down their factories. The Altarians were dying. Their population had dropped by 1/3 in just 1 year. The special crops that humans had developed for their cold, dark world were failing without proper seeds and maintenance. The Altarian government had tried to grow normal crops, but they withered in the weak sunlight. Desperate messages went out to other council species asking for help, but everyone had their own problems. The Nexari offered to share some of their advanced hydroponic technology, but it required rare elements that were no longer being mined and shipped. The Valdorians promised food supplies, but their own agricultural worlds were under attack by Cronin raiders. The medical crisis was spreading, too. The plague that human doctors had controlled was now burning through the outer rim like wildfire. 15 worlds had been completely evacuated, and their populations relocated to refugee camps on other planets. But the camps were overcrowded, and disease spread quickly in the poor conditions. Dr. Yeth of the Karathi Medical Service gave a report that made everyone in the chamber feel sick. "We have tried to replicate the human treatments," she said, "but we do not understand the underlying principles. The medicines work sometimes but fail other times. We cannot predict when or why. The worst part was that some species were hoarding medical supplies for their own people, instead of sharing them with others. The unity that had held the council together for millennia was breaking down as each race looked out for itself." Chancellor Vrax stood to address the assembly. He had been one of the loudest voices against human membership in the early days. He had argued that humans were too primitive and aggressive to be trusted with important decisions. Now he wondered if his own arrogance had doomed them all. "We face an unprecedented crisis," Vrax said. "Our military is failing, our economy is collapsing, and our people are suffering. We must consider all options." A voice from the back of the chamber spoke up. It was Counselor Beth of the small Terran colonies that had chosen to remain with the Council after the human exodus. She was one of only 3 humans left in Council space, and her presence was a constant reminder of what had been lost. "There is one option you have not considered," Beth said quietly. "You could try to bring the humans back." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Many delegates shouted that humans had abandoned their duty and could not be trusted. Others argued that the humans had been the problem all along, and bringing them back would only make things worse. But some voices called for quiet and asked Beth to continue. She stood slowly, looking small and alone among the massive alien delegates. "The humans did not abandon their duty," Beth said. "They were driven away by constant insults and unfair treatment. They offered partnership and were given servitude. They shared their best and were told it was not good enough." Admiral Keth of the Nexary raised his hand. "Even if that is true, how do we contact them? They have vanished completely. Our scouts cannot find any trace of the Exodus fleet." Beth smiled sadly. "That is because you are looking in the wrong places. The humans have not vanished. They have simply gone where you would never think to look." She activated a holographic display that showed the galactic map. Instead of focusing on the bright core where most civilizations lived, she pointed to the dark edges where only primitive species were thought to exist. "Intelligence reports suggest that humans have made contact with species that the Council rejected for membership," Beth said. "Races that we considered too backward or too alien to be worth our attention." The delegates stared at the map in disbelief. The idea that advanced humans would willingly associate with primitive aliens was almost incomprehensible to them. "That is impossible," said the Keth representative. "No civilized species would choose to live among barbarians." Beth's smile became wider and sadder. "That is exactly the kind of thinking that drove the humans away in the first place. You assumed that anyone different from you must be inferior. The humans learned not to make that mistake." As the session ended, Chancellor Vrax remained in his seat long after the other delegates had left. He stared at the empty chamber and thought about the choice his people had made. They had held the greatest alliance in galactic history in their hands and thrown it away because they could not bear to treat their most valuable members as equals. Somewhere out in the dark between the stars, humanity was building something new. And for the first time since the Exodus began, Vrax wondered if the humans might be better off without the Council than the Council was without the humans. Lisa Parker stood on the bridge of the cargo ship and watched her team load the last containers. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Morrison walked out of the Council chambers. Now every human in Council space was packing up and leaving. The guys, military base below them, had been home to 5,000 human soldiers and support staff. They had lived here for 12 years, protecting Council trade routes and keeping peace between angry alien neighbors. But now the base was empty, except for the alien workers who came to see what the humans had left behind. "Loading complete." "Commander," said her aide, a young man named Tony Chen. He looked sad as he watched their old home disappear behind them. Many of the humans had made friends among the alien crews. Some had even married aliens and started families. Leaving was not easy for anyone. But the orders from Earth were clear. All humans were to leave Council space immediately. No exceptions, no delays, no looking back. The United Earth Federation had tried to work with the Council for 15 years. Now they were done trying. Lisa's ship was one of hundreds carrying humans away from their old lives. Some were military personnel like her crew. Others were doctors, engineers, teachers, and traders. All of them were leaving the galaxy they had helped to build and protect. The first signs of trouble came within days of the human withdrawal. Lisa received reports from across the galaxy about problems that were getting worse without human help. The Cronin hegemony had been quiet for years, kept in check by joint council patrols led by human commanders. But now the Cronins were testing the borders again. They sent small raiding parties to attack isolated outposts and shipping lanes. The council fleets responded, but without human tactical expertise. They were slow and clumsy. The Nexari had the best ships in the galaxy, but they fought like machines. They followed rigid battle plans that worked well against other machines but failed against clever enemies. The Cronins were savage, but they were not stupid. They quickly learned to use hit-and-run tactics that confused the Nexari computers. The Valdorians had experience, but their ships were old and their crews were small. They had relied on human reinforcements to fill their ranks. Without those extra ships and soldiers, they could barely protect their own worlds, let alone help their allies. The Zephyrians were numerous, but poorly trained. They had always counted on human officers to lead their fleets in battle. Without that leadership, their ships flew in circles while the enemy escaped or destroyed them one by one. On the trade world of Sigma Station, Merchant Captain Pete Williams was shutting down, the last human shipping company. The station had been a busy hub where goods from 100 worlds came together to be sorted and sent to their final destinations. Human companies had managed most of the logistics because they were good at solving complex problems quickly. But now Pete was loading his ships with human cargo and heading for Earth. Behind him, the carefully organized supply chains were falling apart. Alien companies tried to take over the human routes, but they did not understand how everything fit together. Food shipments meant for the Altarians were sent to the wrong planets. Medical supplies for the outer colonies sat in warehouses because no one knew where to send them. Raw materials for factories were lost in bureaucratic confusion. Within weeks, shortages began appearing on dozens of worlds. The Altarians were hit especially hard. Their home world had been slowly dying for generations as their sun grew dimmer and cooler. Human scientists had developed special crops that could grow in low light and cold soil. Human farmers had taught the Altarians how to grow these crops and had continued to supply seeds and equipment. But now the human farms were silent and the supply ships had stopped coming. The Altarian government sent desperate messages to the council asking for help. The council formed a committee to study the problem. While they studied, Altarians began to starve. Dr. Kate Sullivan received similar pleas from medical centers across the galaxy. The plague affecting the Outer Rim colonies had been a major crisis 2 years ago. It killed quickly and spread even faster. But human doctors had developed treatments that kept it under control. Human medical teams had stayed on the affected worlds to monitor the situation and treat new cases. Now those teams were gone, and the plague was spreading again. The alien doctors tried to continue the treatments, but they did not fully understand how the human medicines worked. Some colonies were lost completely when incorrect dosages killed patients faster than the disease. On Earth, President Alex Turner addressed a joint session of the United Nations. The assembly hall was packed with representatives from every human, nation, and colony. Outside crowds gathered to watch the speech on giant screens. For 15 years, the president said, we offered our best to the galaxy. We shared our knowledge, our strength, and our lives with alien civilizations. We asked only to be treated as equals and partners. The crowd was silent as Turner continued. Instead, we were treated as servants. Our contributions were ignored. Our needs were dismissed. Our colonies were given away to satisfy alien politics. Turner's voice grew stronger. They told us we were too young, too aggressive, too different. They said we needed to learn our place. Well, now they will learn what happens when we take our place elsewhere. The evacuation continued across the galaxy. Human research stations went dark. Human trade posts closed their doors. Human patrol ships disappeared from the space lanes. Everywhere humans had been, there was now empty space and growing problems. Some aliens tried to convince humans to stay. The Karathi offered better trade deals. The Silani promised cultural exchange programs. The Keth suggested new treaty terms. But the humans politely declined and continued packing. The most desperate attempts came from the Nexari. They sent a delegation to the last human military base before it closed. The Nexari admiral was a tall blue woman named Zara, who had worked with human commanders for years. You cannot leave, Admiral Zara told Commander Rick Davis as he supervised the final equipment removal. The Cronins will overrun everything without human tactical support. Rick looked at her with tired eyes. That is not our problem anymore, he said. You made it clear that human tactics were too unpredictable and dangerous. We were wrong, Zara said quickly. The Council was wrong. Please reconsider. Rick shook his head. Too late for that. We offered partnership and you gave us servitude. Now you can see how well your superior alien methods work without us. As the last human ships left Council space, they carried more than just people and equipment. They carried the knowledge, skills, and experience that had kept galactic civilization running smoothly. The aliens who remained behind were about to learn just how much they had depended on the humans they had treated so poorly. In the dark space between galaxies, the human Exodus fleet regrouped and set course for unknown regions. Behind them, the greatest civilization in the galaxy began its slow collapse into chaos and war. Admiral Elena Vasquez had seen many terrible things in her long career with the Nixari fleet, but nothing had prepared her for what the galaxy had become. 2 years after the human Exodus, the Galactic Council controlled less than half the space it once ruled. The rest belonged to the Cronin hegemony or had simply fallen into chaos. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Nixari vessel Bright Logic, and reviewed the latest casualty reports. 12 more worlds had fallen to Cronin attacks in the past month. The survivors were fleeing toward the Council core worlds, creating refugee camps that strained resources even further. Beside her stood General Thek of the Valdorian Defense Corps. His gray fur was streaked with white, and his ancient eyes showed the weariness of a soldier who had fought too many losing battles. Together they commanded the last major fleet loyal to the Council. The situation is hopeless, General Thek said quietly. We cannot win this war with our current forces. Elena nodded grimly. The math was simple and brutal. The Cronin hegemony had more ships, better tactics, and higher morale. Every Council victory was temporary while every Council defeat was permanent. At this rate, organized resistance would collapse within 6 months. There is one possibility, Elena said. We could try to find the humans. Thek looked at her with surprise. The Exodus fleet? They vanished completely. Our best scouts have found no trace of them. Because we have been looking in the wrong places, Elena replied. She activated the Yike star chart on the main display. We searched the core worlds and the established trade routes, but what if they went somewhere else entirely? The search mission launched 3 weeks later. Elena and Thek commanded a small task force of 12 ships, the best the Council could spare from the desperate defense of their remaining territory. They had enough supplies for 6 months and orders to make contact with humanity at any cost. The first clues came from refugee reports. Traders fleeing the Cronin advance spoke of strange ships seen near the galactic rim. The vessels used unknown technology and their crews refused to identify themselves. Most aliens dismissed these reports as fantasies born from stress and fear. But Elena paid attention to the details. The ship designs sounded familiar, like human engineering, but more advanced. The energy signatures matched no known alien technology, but were similar to experimental human engines from before the Exodus. Following these scattered reports, the task force traveled toward the galaxy's edge, where stars were sparse and most species had never bothered to explore. It was a region of failed colonies and primitive civilizations that the Council had always ignored. What they found there shocked them to their core. The first sign was a patrol ship that intercepted them at the border of an unnamed system. The vessel was sleek and powerful, clearly built with technology beyond anything the current Council could field. Its hull bore no markings, but its configuration was unmistakably human. Unknown vessels, you are entering Terran Commonwealth space, came the transmission. State your business and prepare to be escorted to a border station. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. Terran Commonwealth? The humans had not just survived their exile, they had built something new. The patrol ship was commanded by Nick Davis, a former Council liaison officer who Elena remembered from joint training exercises. But the man who appeared on her screen was different from the frustrated diplomat she had known. This Nick Davis wore a uniform she did not recognize and spoke with the confidence of someone who served a government that respected his abilities. "Admiral Vasquez," Nick said with professional courtesy but no warmth. "I was not expecting to see council ships in this region." "Commander Davis," Elena replied carefully. "We are here on a diplomatic mission. We request an audience with human leadership." Nick's expression did not change. "The Terran Commonwealth has no diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. You are ordered to depart our space immediately." Elena's heart sank, but she pressed on. "Commander, the galaxy is in crisis. The Cronin hegemony has overrun dozens of worlds. Billions are dying. We need human help." For a moment, something flickered in Nick's eyes, but when he spoke, his voice remained cold. "The galaxy made its choice when it decided humans were not worthy partners. The Commonwealth has its own responsibilities now." General Thek stepped forward. "Surely you cannot ignore the suffering of innocent civilians." Nick turned his gaze to the elderly Valdorian. "General Thek, as I recall, your government voted to relocate human colonies 3 separate times to make room for Valdorian expansion. Did you consider innocent civilians then?" Thek's ears drooped with shame. "We made mistakes." "Yes, you did," Nick agreed. "And now you are living with the consequences. The Commonwealth wishes you well, but we cannot help you." As the council ships were escorted to the border, Elena got glimpses of what humanity had built in their exile. Massive shipyards orbited the system's planets, producing vessels that combined human ingenuity with alien technologies she did not recognize. Space stations bustled with activity, as ships from dozens of different species came and went. Most shocking of all were the aliens themselves. Elena saw creatures that the Council had classified as primitive or non-sentient, working alongside humans as equals. There were the Rokathi, silicon-based beings that the Council had dismissed as living rocks. There were the Whisper Folk, energy, entities that most aliens considered barely intelligent. There were even some species that Elena had never seen before. "How many species have joined this Commonwealth?" she asked Nick during the escort flight. 43 full members and 62 associate members, Nick replied proudly. "All working together as equals." Elena was stunned. In 2 years, the humans had built an alliance larger than anything the Council had achieved in centuries, and they had done it by including the very species that the Council had rejected or ignored. As her ship crossed back into Council space, Elena received one final transmission from Nick. "Admiral, if any Council species wish to apply for Commonwealth membership, they are welcome to submit formal applications. All applicants will be judged on their willingness to contribute to common prosperity and abide by principles of equality and mutual respect." The implications were staggering. The humans were not just surviving without the Council, they were thriving. They had found better partners among the species that the Council considered inferior. And they were succeeding where the Council was, failing because they treated everyone as equals rather than ranking species by arbitrary standards of superiority. When Elena reported back to the Council leadership, the chamber fell silent. Chancellor Vrak stared at the intelligence reports with disbelief. The idea that humans could build something better than the Council in just 2 years challenged everything the elder species believed about themselves. "This is impossible," said the Keth representative. "Primitive species cannot support advanced civilization." "Apparently they can," Elena replied, "when they are given the chance and treated with respect." Some Council members began to whisper about applying for Commonwealth membership themselves. The Nexari were facing extinction from Cronin advances and needed allies desperately. A few, smaller species had already secretly sent envoys toward Commonwealth space. But most of the elder races could not accept the truth that Elena had discovered. They had spent millennia believing in their own superiority and the inferiority of younger species. Admitting that they had been wrong would mean admitting that their entire worldview was based on arrogance and prejudice. So they chose denial instead of truth. They convinced themselves that the Commonwealth was temporary, that it would collapse under the weight of its own diversity. They told each other that primitive species would soon reveal their true nature and betray their human leaders. Meanwhile, The galaxy continued to burn around them while just beyond their reach, a new civilization rose from the ashes of their old mistakes. The humans had not just walked away from the Council, they had shown the galaxy what cooperation could achieve when it was based on respect, rather than dominance. And for the first time since the Exodus began, some aliens began to wonder if joining the humans might be their only hope for survival. Chancellor Vrax stood alone in the ruins of the Council Chamber on Kepler Prime. 5 years had passed since humanity walked away, and the galaxy was unrecognizable. The great station that had once been the center of galactic civilization was now a dead hulk drifting through space. The power had failed months ago when the last maintenance crew evacuated. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on empty seats where thousands of delegates once debated the future of the galaxy. Now only a dozen council species remained, scattered across a handful of worlds that somehow survived the chaos. Vrax activated an old recording device, one of the few pieces of human-built equipment that still worked after all these years. It was ironic that even now, at the end of everything, he depended on human technology to preserve his final words. This is Chancellor Vrax of the Zephyrian Republic, recording what I believe will be the final session of the Galactic Council, he said to the empty chamber. History will record that we held the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known in our hands, and we threw it away because we could not bear to treat our greatest contributors as equals. The truth was bitter, but undeniable. The Galactic Council had destroyed itself through arrogance and prejudice. They had possessed the most capable species in galactic history, and driven them away because acknowledging human worth would have meant admitting their own mistakes. The Kronan hegemony now controlled most of the galaxy through brutal conquest. They ruled through fear and violence, turning proud civilizations into slave labor camps. The few free worlds that remained were isolated enclaves barely managing to survive. But the real tragedy was not military defeat or economic collapse. The real tragedy was that it had all been preventable. If the Council had simply treated humans as equals instead of subjects, none of this would have happened. Vrax turned off the recorder and walked to the observation deck. Through the cracked windows, he could see the graveyard of ships that surrounded Kepler Prime. Some were Council vessels destroyed in the final battles. Others were refugee transports that ran out of fuel while fleeing the Kronan advance. Among the wreckage floated pieces of human engineering. Hyperspace gates that had connected the galaxy. Communication relays that had carried messages between the stars. Medical stations that had saved billions of lives. All of it now silent and dark, abandoned when their creators were driven away. Meanwhile, far beyond the reach of Council or Kronan, the Terran Commonwealth thrived. Reports from the few traders brave enough to venture into Commonwealth space spoke of wonders that seemed impossible. Worlds where dozens of species worked together in harmony. Technologies that combined the best ideas from hundreds of different civilizations. An economy based on cooperation rather than exploitation. On New Terra, the capital world of the Commonwealth, President Maria Santos reviewed the daily reports from across their expanding territory. The Commonwealth now encompassed over 200 worlds and 43 full member species. Each day brought new applications for membership from species fleeing the chaos in Council space. The success was not accidental. From the beginning, the Commonwealth had been built on principles that the Council had rejected. Every species was treated as an equal partner regardless of their technology level or cultural differences. Decisions were made by consensus rather than dominance. Resources were shared based on need rather than political influence. Jake Morrison, now serving as Foreign Minister, handled the constant stream of requests for aid from former Council worlds. Some were desperate pleas from species facing extinction. Others were formal diplomatic overtures from governments that had finally swallowed their pride. The Commonwealth's response was always the same. They welcomed applications for membership from any species willing to contribute to common prosperity and abide by principles of equality and mutual respect. But they would not rescue civilizations that refused to abandon the prejudices that had caused their problems in the first place. Some species made the transition successfully. The Nexari, facing complete annihilation by Kronan forces, had become the first major council race to join the Commonwealth as associate members. They were shocked to discover that as Commonwealth partners, they received more respect and autonomy than they had ever enjoyed as Council founders. The Nixari Admiral Zara, who had begged humans not to leave years earlier, now served in the Commonwealth fleet. She commanded a mixed crew of humans, Nixari, and 6 other species working together as equals. Her ships used technology that combined Nixari engineering with human innovation and innovations from species the Council had never even contacted. "It is remarkable," Admiral Zara reported to President Santos. "We accomplish more in a month than the old Council managed in a year. When everyone contributes their best ideas instead of competing for dominance, the results exceed anything we thought possible. But for every species that adapted to Commonwealth principles, dozens more clung to their old beliefs. The surviving Valdorian colonies still insisted they deserved special treatment because of their ancient heritage. The remaining Zephyrian worlds demanded preferential trade agreements based on their past influence. The Keth territories refused to consider membership in any organization that included species they considered inferior. Pride prevented most former Council races from accepting help from the civilization they had once dismissed. They preferred slow decline and eventual extinction to admitting they had been wrong about human worth. Dr. Kate Sullivan, now heading Commonwealth Medical Services, received daily requests for assistance from plague-stricken worlds in Council space. The disease that human doctors had once controlled was now killing millions. But when Commonwealth medical teams offered help, most governments refused unless they were guaranteed positions of authority over the human personnel. They would rather die than be saved by people they consider beneath them, Dr. Sullivan told President Santos during a staff meeting. "It is the most tragic form of suicide I have ever witnessed." The Commonwealth continued to grow stronger while the old galaxy burned. New technologies emerged from the collaboration between dozens of different scientific traditions. Trade flourished between species that had never communicated before humans introduced them. Arts and culture reached new heights as creative minds from across the spectrum of galactic diversity worked together. Children born in Commonwealth space grew up thinking it was normal for different species to live and work together as equals. A young Altarian girl asked Foreign Minister Morrison why the old Council worlds didn't join their peaceful alliance. Morrison considered the question carefully as he watched human and alien children playing together in the gardens of Commonwealth Station. In the distance, ships from 20 different species docked at the massive orbital facility that served as the Commonwealth's diplomatic center. "Some people," Morrison said finally, "find it easier to hate than to admit they were wrong. They would rather destroy themselves than change their minds." The girl looked confused. "But that doesn't make sense. Why would anyone choose to be unhappy when they could choose to be happy instead?" Morrison smiled at her innocent wisdom. "That, my dear, is the question that destroyed the greatest civilization in galactic history." A new ship arrived at the station as they watched. It carried refugees from another fallen Council world, coming to request sanctuary in the Commonwealth. The galaxy was learning, slowly and painfully, that civilization could not be built on the dominance of the strong over the weak. True civilization required the partnership of equals working toward common goals. It required the courage to admit mistakes and the wisdom to learn from them. Most importantly, it required treating everyone with dignity and respect regardless of their differences. Humanity had not just walked away from the Galactic Council. They had shown the galaxy what it could have been, if only it had been willing to listen. And for those species brave enough to abandon their prejudices and join the Commonwealth, that better future was finally within reach. The old galaxy was dead, killed by arrogance and pride. But from its ashes, a new civilization was rising based on the radical idea that every sentient being deserved to be treated as an equal. It was an idea worth building a new galaxy around. Jake Morrison sat in the cold metal chair and watched the alien beings argue about his people. The Galactic Council chamber was huge and round, with thousands of seats filled with creatures from across the galaxy. Some had blue skin and 4 arms. Others looked like giant insects with wings. A few were just floating balls of light that spoke through machines. All of them seemed to hate humans. The Zephyrian representative stood at the speaking platform. He was tall and thin with silver skin that shined under the bright lights. His voice was loud and angry, as he pointed one long finger at the human section. "The humans are too aggressive," the Zephyrian said. "They build colonies too fast. They make too many ships. They ask for too much space. We cannot allow this to continue." Jake felt his hands close into fists. He had heard this same speech 100 times before. The humans were always too something. Too fast, too loud, too different. It did not matter that humans had saved half the galaxy from wars and disease. It did not matter that human engineers had built the roads between the stars that everyone used. None of that seemed to count when the council made their votes. The Valdorian speaker came next. She was old and covered in gray fur that fell down to the floor. Her people had ruled space for 10,000 years before humans ever left their home planet. She spoke slowly like she was talking to children. "Humans are young," she said. "They do not understand the old ways. They need to learn patience. They need to learn their place." Jake wanted to stand up and shout. Learn their place? Humans had built the medical centers that kept the Altarians alive when their sons started to die. Human soldiers had stopped the Cronan pirates from destroying trade ships. Human farmers grew food that fed a dozen worlds. What place were they supposed to learn? The Nexari delegate was next. The Nexari were blue and tall with big heads full of brains. They thought they were smarter than everyone else because they had better technology. The Nexari never said much, but when they did speak, other aliens listened. "We have studied human behavior," the Nexari said in their cold voice. "They are unpredictable. They do not follow logical patterns. This makes them dangerous to galactic peace." More voices joined in. The Karathi complained that human music was too loud. The Solani said human food smelled bad. The Keth worried that humans bred too fast and would take over everything. One by one, they all found reasons why humans were the problem. Jake looked around at his small team. There were only 5 humans in the entire council chamber. 5 people speaking for all of humanity, while thousands of aliens decided what humans could and could not do. The other humans looked as tired as he felt. They had been fighting these same battles for 15 years. It had not always been this bad. When humans first joined the council, everyone seemed happy to have them. Human engineers were asked to build new hyperspace gates. Human doctors helped stop diseases. Human soldiers volunteered to keep peace in dangerous places. For a while, it seemed like humans had found their place among the stars. But as humans grew stronger and built more colonies, the older races became worried. They created new rules that seemed to only affect humans. They voted down every human proposal. When human colonies were attacked, the council took months to decide if they should help. When humans asked for fair treatment, they were told to be patient and wait their turn. The worst part was that humans did all the hard work and got none of the credit. Human cargo ships moved goods between the stars every day. Human patrol boats protected trade routes from pirates. Human research stations found new medicines and technologies. But in the council chambers, humans were treated like servants who should be grateful for any small favor. The current debate was about the Tau Ceti system. Humans had lived there for 50 years. They had built cities and farms and raised families. The soil was good, and the weather was perfect for human crops. But the Zephyrians wanted the system for something they called a cultural preservation zone. They said their ancestors had once visited those planets, and so they had special rights to the whole system. Jake knew this was not about culture. Tau Ceti had rare metals that were worth more than most planets. The Zephyrians wanted those metals for themselves. They were using the council to steal what humans had built with their own hands. The vote was called. One by one, the alien delegates raised their hands or made their signals. The final count was 847 to 1. Only humanity voted against giving away their own colonies. Jake stood up slowly. The chamber became quiet as thousands of alien eyes turned to look at him. He was not tall or strong like some of the other species. He did not have blue skin or forearms or fancy technology. He was just a middle-aged human with gray hair and tired eyes. But when he spoke, his voice carried across the huge chamber. "The United Earth Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately," Jake said. His words were calm, but everyone could hear the anger underneath. "We are done. The chamber exploded with noise. Aliens jumped up from their seats and started shouting in dozens of different languages. Some seemed shocked, others looked angry. A few appeared scared. Jake turned to his team. "Pack everything," he told them. "We are leaving." The human delegates started gathering their papers and equipment. Other council members rushed toward them, trying to speak, but Jake ignored them all. He had spent 15 years trying to make this system work. 15 years of being insulted and ignored and treated like children. He was tired of begging for respect from people who would never give it. As the human team walked toward the exit, the Zephyrian representative called out. "You cannot just leave," he said. "The council needs human participation." Jake stopped and turned around one last time. He looked at all the aliens who had spent the day explaining why humans were not good enough for equal treatment. "Good luck governing yourselves," he said. Then he walked out of the chamber and did not look back. Behind him, the greatest government in galactic history continued to argue and shout, not knowing that it had just signed its own death warrant.